All right, thanks for being patient. Good morning. Thanks for joining me on this early morning. My name is Tracie Martin. I am a principal security engineer for the Internet of Things. I've worked in security for about 20 years doing a whole bunch of odd jobs. I've done sort of everything from compliance to incident response to building tools to OSINT. I've done just about everything, and now I found myself in the Internet of Things. I run DefendCon, or I did in the before times when we had real conferences in person. So hopefully next year, once everybody's vaccinated and healthy, we'll start that up again. I'm a veteran of the United States Air Force. I do OSINT as a hobby, which I guess makes me kind of weird. I participate in a bunch of different OSINT groups, and I do some OSINT talks based on my experience at NATO. I also do photography, and I raise a small child, which is why I never, ever sleep. This should go without saying, but the views in this don't represent my employer. They're my views. So if I say something that you think is stupid or you disagree with me, it's not the views of my employer, it's just my odd random musings on the world. And we have a freeze, there we go, sorry. Okay, so first of all, we need to talk about what is the Internet of Things. And there's a bunch of definitions, and it's funny because this is a hotly debated topic in the community, but the way I define it and the way most people define it is it's anything that has a physical sensor, anything that acts in the physical world that's then connected to the internet. If you have been paying attention at all, you'll know that this market is growing. There's $100 billion in market revenue for the first time in 2017, and it's supposed to be 1.6 trillion by 2025. So one of the big factors that I got into Internet of Things is that it is such a growing space, and there's so many people needed to secure this ever-growing threat. There's so much to learn, and it's changing every single day. Devices are getting smarter and faster and permeating every facet of our lives, and with that, the security threats get bigger and bigger. So what is MQTT? This talk focuses on a very specific portion of the IoT, and it's a protocol called MQTT. It was developed a long time ago for use in oil rigs. It's designed predominantly for devices with a really small code footprint. So what that means is, unlike other communication protocols like HTTP, it doesn't take as much overhead, it's not as processing intensive, and it has the idea that you can still ensure quality of message without actually having a really heavyweight handshake in between. So it was created in '99 out of IBM, and it was designed in a way that you have these oil rigs out in the middle of the ocean, and they're connected over these satellite links that are really lossy and kind of go out and on, off and on all the time. So we needed a protocol that was both stateless but also guaranteed to pass messages when one or the other of the server or the client was offline. And so that's why they created MQTT. But the interesting thing is that, kind of like HTTP, this was never designed with the idea of security in mind. This was never designed in a way to be secure because they assumed that the people on the oil rig were trusted, and they assumed that the people back at the plant that were getting the information were trusted, and the satellite was mostly trusted, so it was pretty much okay. But then they started adapting this protocol for use in the Internet of Things, and just like HTTP, that's when things started to get a little weird. So the benefits are it's super scalable, super scalable. You can support hundreds of thousands, if not millions of devices simultaneously. Is packet agnostic, which basically means I can send any kind of data over MQTT, and it's like an envelope. Whatever I put in it, it'll happily unpack it and go about its merry way. It's really reliable for a low bandwidth protocol. Unlike UDP, for example, which is a best effort delivery system, you can actually set quality of service messages where MQTT will just keep trying to deliver until it finally gets through. So if, say, a broker goes offline for days or months at a time, I still know that those messages will get through because of the quality of service flag that I've set. It's also decoupled. And that means that the broker and the client don't have to be online at the same time. And this is really important if you're, in the middle of a field in the Sahara and you don't have reliable internet connection, but you still need to get information on, say, your water sensors back to a centralized facility. You can't guarantee that that sensor will always be online at the same time that the broker is online. It's also super efficient. You can pass a lot of information really, really quickly. And in a network that has high latency, you're guaranteed that that message isn't going to get lost or garbled along the way. All right, so there's a couple key ideas. The first one that we need to talk about is something called a publisher. And you can think about this kind of like a device. Most publishers are devices. You can think of it like a light bulb in your smart home. So the light bulb will publish a message that says, hey, I'm on, or hey, I'm off, or hey, I'm overheating. And that message goes to a broker who then pushes it to a subscriber. So you can think of it, or at least I think of it, kind of like a mailman, right? So the mailman sits in the middle and he takes a letter from one person and he delivers it to another person. And that's where the broker comes in. It sits like a spoken hub, and it's the hub. And so the hub then is responsible for making sure that everybody who publishes on a topic and everybody that subscribes to that topic gets their messages. And topics are just categories of messages. So you can think of them kind of like folders on a Windows operating system. So I might have a topic that is light bulbs, and all of the light bulbs will publish on my light bulbs topic. I might have a topic that is sensors, and that could be all my IR sensors in my network. And the cool thing about topics is that they're multi-level. So I could have sensors / light bulbs where I would get everything that I published to sensors and only things published to light bulbs if I was a light bulb. So this is kind of what it looks like in a really, really simple version. This is based on an IR sensor that I built at my house because I have a cat whose food is in the laundry room, and I always forget to refill her water because I'm a terrible person, and then I feel guilty. So I put a little water sensor in her dish that lets me know, and it sends an MQTT broadcast to my phone that says, "Hey, dummy, go refill her water." And so you can do this at home with just about anything. There's a link at the end of this talk that'll get you started. It's actually really simple to set up. MQTT is widely available. There's a ton of free brokers that you can set up. And it really helps you understand how this works in a larger context. All right, so use cases. It's really interesting. Once you start looking through this, you'll start seeing that MQTT is surprisingly everywhere. I don't think I realized how everywhere it was until I started working in this field. But if you look, you have automotive manufacturers that are using it. You have home automation. I think that's the use case that most people are familiar with, right? Your light bulbs and your smart door locks at home use MQTT most likely. Telecommunications, large telcos use MQTT to manage all kinds of things. Industrial manufacturing, all of these use MQTT to do all kinds of things in your daily life. So let's look at some specific examples. So we've all heard about the connected car, and some of us are super excited. I, for one, welcome our robot overlords, so I'm pretty excited about connected cars. But they almost all use MQTT. And the reason they do this is because you never know where your car is going to be. I can't guarantee that it's going to have cellular or Wi-Fi, and I really need to make sure that those messages are going to get through at some point. And that's why HTTP or SMS aren't really suited for this, because both of them require either concurrent connectivity or a reliability and delivery system that's going to be just too compute intensive. So the car can publish to topics like speed or fuel level or oil life, and there can be a subscriber like a phone, an app on your phone. If you use Ford, for example, they have an app that tells you, oh, your oil life is at 30 days. Oh, you need to go in for maintenance. Your speed has been too high over the last 30 days. Whatever. There's a whole bunch of different things that they can publish these to, and so it's surprising how often we see this, but we don't even know that it's around. All right. And then home automation. So this is probably the use case that most people are familiar with. You have a smart light bulb, you have a smart door lock, you have a smart cam in your living room, and the same situation, right? The light bulb says, hey, I'm on, and the broker goes, cool, I'm on, and it sends a message to the subscriber and says, hey, the light bulbs are on. And this works in reverse too. The phone can publish to that same topic and say, hey, turn the light off, and the broker takes that message, sends it to the light bulb, and the light bulb says, okay, cool, I'll turn off. Oh, come on. Where it's really interesting is in industrial manufacturing, and this is becoming more and more common. There's still a lot of proprietary industrial protocols that are not MQTT, but you're actually seeing a huge rise in MQTT applications in things like energy grids and manufacturing, interconnected factories that do predictive maintenance and can foresee issues with devices downstream. So if I'm building a car and my welding machine is about to go out of spec, it can actually predict that the last, 12 cars that I made may need extra inspection because my welding machine wasn't quite within spec. So it's super powerful, and it gives a way for people to manage a bunch of devices across factories all over the globe. But the bad thing is there's, of course, just like any other protocol, a ton of different types of attacks. First is denial of service, and I think we're all pretty familiar with that. Poor auth in, poor auth z. There's software vulnerabilities because the MQTT broker is just usually a Java application. So, basically any Java vulnerability that you can find, and then a couple extra on top just for good measure. And then, of course, the transport security. The piece between the device and the broker is really vulnerable to interception. So denial of service. This is interesting in MQTT. Those of you who are old enough, like me, to remember hub and spoke networking, MQTT is basically a version of that. And if you, like me, once upon a time when you were young and bright-eyed, learned that the downfall of hub and spoke model was that if the hub goes down, everybody goes down. MQTT kind of suffers from this as well because it is the central hub for all of the spokes of devices connected to it. Now, there's ways you can get around this. You can do concurrent brokers and you can do failover brokers, but many people don't have this set up or don't have it set up correctly. And even if they do have failovers, you can seize all of the available broker connections by just spamming a bunch of messages. So if you look at like our light bulb situation, I can say, instead of the light bulb beaconing every couple minutes to say, hey, I'm on, hey, I'm on, if I just go to the broker and spam the crap out of it and say, hey, the broker's going to get overwhelmed. And then it can't actually respond to legitimate clients on the network that are publishing or subscribing to messages. I can also spoof client IDs, and this is kind of funny. So you have to have a unique client ID to connect to MQTT, but depending on how your broker's configured, I can just tell you that this is my client ID. So if my client ID is 123, I can come online as an attacker and say, hey, I'm device 123. And it'll be like, wait, there's too many people with the same name. One of you's got to get off. And so it'll actually drop both connections. And as an attacker, I can reconnect before the original and then assume that client ID's session so that it can't reconnect. Multiple unauthorized subscribe and publish messages. So this is kind of like, if you think of, instead of just overwhelming it with messages, try to subscribe to topics that I'm not allowed to. So if I'm a light bulb and I try to subscribe to, let's say, my kitchen stoves topic, then the MQTT broker is going to say, nope, can't do that, not cool, go away. But if I do that over and over and over again, the MQTT broker kind of melts down and is like, wait, there's too many things happening and I can't handle all of these unauth requests. And then there's malformed packets. Basically, like any application, you can futz around with the actual packet and the packet header. And once it hits the MQTT broker, it causes it to kind of stumble and go, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know what this is. And so the more you do that, the more likely it is that the MQTT broker will fall over. Poor authentication. So we mentioned this before. It was never designed to have authentication. And so there's authentication now, but it's not great. Most MQTT brokers use username and passwords. By default, they're sent in the clear. So if I can talk to the broker, if I can get on the network, I can figure out what the username and passwords are pretty easily. I can also, the usernames and client IDs are pretty easily guessable, especially by mass consumer electronics devices manufacturers. They'll usually go off something like the serial number or the device IMEI. And so I can figure out kind of what's going on and just guess that number. And that's how I can figure out what the usernames are. And then if the passwords are easily guessable, like say most home routers, it's pretty easy to kind of figure out and go to the broker with that username and client ID. We also have this idea that it's better to do device certificates than username and passwords. And that's true, except when you do the same device certificate for every single device on your network. So if you take, for example, a large television manufacturer who has the same device certificate for millions and millions and millions of TVs, it only takes one television being attacked, and most of these devices don't have protected memory. So now I have that certificate, and I can connect to the MQTT broker, and I can subscribe to anything because they only use one certificate. Poor authorization. Okay, so poor authorization, the idea is that you're supposed to restrict topics to the devices that need them. It's pretty basic, just like anything in a file system. You should only have access to the files that you need to use for your day, and a light bulb shouldn't be able to publish to turn the stove on, right? Like that's a bad model. But unfortunately, per device, per topic administration is really, really cumbersome. And so what happens is, just like any dev who's, Shemad 777, you kind of get a lot of folks that just sort of do a splat. And so they're like, oh, just everybody can subscribe to anything and it's fine. And that leads to poor device segregation, which means that if your light bulb gets compromised, I could turn on your stove, or if your stove gets compromised, I could unlock your door. And so that causes this cascading failure effect where if all of your smart devices aren't secure, then none of your smart devices are secure. And then, of course, software vulnerabilities. If you go to the CVSS database, then you can see there's a bunch of MQTT broker vulnerabilities. Most of these brokers don't get patched reliably. They're on incredibly old versions. It's like just like any application, right? There's RCEs out there, they're still unpatched. I don't think there's a lot of focus on this right now. And so I think we'll expect to see this increase as the adoption and notoriety of this protocol increase. There's also vulnerabilities in the data aggregation and facilitation dashboards. So a lot of these use a web app or a phone app to do, hey, all your lights are on, or hey, your stove is off, or hey, your stove is on. And they allow you to publish and subscribe from that dashboard. So if you can compromise the dashboard because the web app is really terribly coded, then you can also compromise a lot of information on the network. And then, of course, there's device side vulnerabilities, right? So a lot of manufacturers ship almost with a default Linux kernel. And so they have a bunch of libraries and packages they don't actually need. They have SSH enabled, or they have Telnet enabled on some of these. They have much more power than they need for the device that they're creating, but they don't lock it down. So that's just a much bigger attack surface for attackers to get to. And then transport security, this one seems to get the most attention, I think, in MQTT circles, mainly because, let's be honest, encryption is hard. This is why, PGP is such a nightmare. Encryption's hard if you're not one of the big vendors doing a big cryptography rollout. If you're not running a PKI server, it's hard to do your own crypto and do it well. And so a lot of people just opt not to encrypt the transit at all. And so they assume that everybody on the factory floor has access to every machine. So if you're thinking about it in an unconnected factory, this makes total sense, because the MQTT broker and the client can only be accessed physically by people who in theory have access to all that information. The problem is, with more things getting connected and more things connecting to the cloud, we now have this opportunity for attackers, once they can get inside that network, to then view and possibly manipulate all of the information that goes across that network. And even if they do try to do cryptography, they have really insecure cryptography because they're running on really low compute devices that can't handle modern encryption. And there's a lot of work going into this right now in NIST to see if we can make better lightweight cryptography, but a lot of times they reuse keys or they reuse seed values. And so it becomes really easy to attack the cryptographic footprint. There's also, as we mentioned, a lack of certificate uniqueness. And that means that basically I know what your certificates are, so I can pretty much bypass all of your transit security because I just need one cert. And so when I started looking at this, I'm sure everybody's used Showdown, and I kind of started digging around. I wonder if any MQTT brokers are listening and if I can ping them. So you can go to Showdown and you can try to connect to something called sysbroker. And this is just basically a way of saying, hey, MQTT broker, can you hear me and are you listening? So this was done a while ago, and it returned about 38,000 brokers. And if you think about that, if every broker could have 1 million devices connected to it, and not all of them do, I would say it's probably more common to have a handful of devices. But even at 100 devices per broker, that's a lot of potentially compromised devices that are just out on the public internet. So what does this mean? So if I have roughly 40,000 MQTT devices, which require absolutely no authentication, so this isn't me brute forcing credentials or trying to, do anything fancy like grab a certificate from a device and replay it or any of that. This is just brokers on the internet listening to see what's happening. But what do we really do with that? I mean, Showdown's cool, and I think, at least for me, I like to go and dork around and pretend like I can do massive things, but really you need to have an attack vector now. So I'm too cheap to pay for a subscription to Showdown, and I ran out of my daily search limit, so I started poking around and I found this great tool called MassScan. So it is literally a tool designed to scan the entire internet. If you've used Nmap, it works on the same syntax. Where Nmap obviously is too slow to scan a ton of IP addressable devices, MassScan, given a big enough internet pipe, can literally scan the entire internet. I think it said in 10 or 15 minutes, like some absurdly low amount of time. So what's cool is you can use this then to scan for MQTT brokers. So this is my public service announcements, and I know this is controversial, but you really shouldn't scan the whole internet. You should really only scan things you have permission to scan. Parts of the internet don't like to be scanned. You can cause things to accidentally fall over. You can end up with people in suits and glasses knocking on your door. But hypothetically, if you worked for, say, a large cloud services provider and you had a lot of IP addresses, MassScan would be a great tool to scan your infrastructure to see if any brokers were open, or if you're doing a pen test on, say, a factory or really anything, because you'd be surprised how often MQTT brokers pop up. This is another way to scan for MQTT brokers and see if they're replying back. So I didn't scan the whole internet, but I did make a typo. And so I did scan 16 million hosts on accident because apparently subnetting is hard. I wasn't paying attention. Anyway, it happened. But the good news is now I have lots of data, so you get to benefit from me being kind of a dork. So I scanned on port 1883 and 8883 just to kind of see what was out there. And so I got about 225,000 hosts that were alive. Of those, about 2,500 were squawking back on either port, and about 1,000 were squawking back on 1883. And the reason this is important is if you think about attacking as a funnel, you want to look at your easy stuff first and then get to your harder stuff as you have time. And so if the host is communicating on 1883, I know that there's no encryption, and so I don't have to worry about getting over that barrier. So that's where I focus my efforts. If I were doing a legit engagement, I would probably go deeper into 883 and seeing if I could do device certificate compromise or any of those things. But for this exercise, I really just wanted to see if there were any brokers I could access that wouldn't ask me for anything. So along comes PAJO, MQTT, so you can go download this. It's just an MQTT package that allows you to communicate with brokers. And you can send connect flags to these brokers and see if they respond. And based on their response, that kind of gives you an idea of how they're going to let you access them. So the best one is connection 0, connection accepted. That means the MQTT broker was like, doors open, come on in. Number 1 is less okay, but that's all right. It just means your protocol versions are incompatible, so you need to update, and maybe they're on a down level protocol and you're on an up level protocol. Less easy, but still doable. Number 2 is interesting because it means your identifier was rejected. So in a lot of cases, you'll see where they have client IDs, unique client IDs, but no password. So this means you just need to do a better job of guessing the client ID. Again, not easy, but not impossible. Number 3 is kind of a, service unavailable. You can come back and try later. That's basically, it's a binary. It's either up or down. Number 4 gets a little harder because now I don't know if it's a bad username or a password. So now I have to kind of futz around and try that. And then number 5 is just a flat out, sorry, go away. Either they're doing some kind of device filtering or connection filtering. And number 5 is just that area where I go, you know what, this probably isn't going to give me enough time unless this is a really valuable asset. So now that we kind of have a list of what we want to do and a list of IPs that we want to target, there's this great tool by Akamai that's called MQTTPwn. And I cannot express to you in words how much I love this tool and how much I wish I was smart enough to build something like this. I just consume other people's tools because they're always just so much better than the crap I throw together. But if you have a chance, go download it. It's so much fun. It allows you to do brute forcing of credentials. So if you get that bad username password, it'll try a bunch of default. And I think you can also add rainbow tables in there. It's been a minute since I've done that. It also enumerates topics. So if you connect to a broker, you can see all of the topics that you can subscribe to or publish or read. It also helps do reconnaissance. So there's a ton, it's a super powerful tool. You could probably do an entire talk just on that, but I'd highly recommend go checking it out. So this was just I tried to grab the most innocuous piece of the topic enumeration from one of the brokers that I connected to, and this seemed to be it. This is basically just topics that for people that are connecting every minute, every 15 minutes, and how many bytes are sent and received. Fairly innocuous, but you can also get some really good data from this. There are other brokers that were, cameras, like their topics were security cameras, or their topics were, industrial manufacturing pieces. So there are definitely things. I would like to believe these are all test environments and that they're just internet facing because reasons. But there are definitely some in this list that I was able to connect to that I don't think they were intended to be connected to from abroad. So if you spend time doing this, you'll find a lot of interesting things that are sort of accidentally on the internet. So we've talked about MQTT and all of its use cases and all of its attack surface. And I think it's really important when we start to talk about concrete examples of where things can go wrong. So I could talk to you about industrial manufacturing robots going rogue and barbecuing a factory floor, or I could talk to you about water plantations that do bad mixes and kill millions. There's a lot of things I could talk to you about, but really I want to focus on something that I think is really the most important use case, and that's the Internet of Cows. So I think this is the piece that I started doing IoT research that broke my brain. We have connected cows to the internet, and not just one cow, hundreds of thousands of cows, and not just one sensor, but multiple sensors per cow. And I can't tell if this is utopia or if this is the Skynet that our forefathers warned us about. But there's a system, and in fact, there's multiple systems that allow you to remotely steer cattle out on the ranches. So if you think about it out in Montana, for example, where you have herds that roam in really big areas, used to be that you had a, cow herder that would kind of mind the cows. Now they wear these collars that nudge them in different directions. And this geofence, so if they get too close to the area they're not supposed to be in, it kind of shocks them and they go away. When it's time to come back from the range, it steers them back to the farm. But they all use MQTT for these messages. So you can imagine if you could take over those collars and start sending messages, nope, go left, nope, go right, everybody go this way. I mean, you could run an entire herd of cattle through a small town and destroy a lot of stuff. And I use this example because it's so funny and so ridiculous, but it kind of speaks to how deeply embedded this protocol and the IoT is in our everyday lives. Things that you don't even think about are connected to the internet and are publishing and subscribing on MQTT topics right now. So we could create the internet of zombie cows. And I think that would be really cool. Not for the cows. Please don't do that. That's really mean to the cows. But in theory, it'd be really cool. The good news is that everything's moving to the cloud, so everything is awesome, which is kind of true. So the good news about the cloud is that most cloud providers enforce TLS to connect to their broker service, which means you have less people running unencrypted over the wire, you have less people using default username and passwords to connect to the broker, so that's a win. You have better MQTT broker defaults. You're talking about companies who spend a lot of money on application security, have a really robust application security program, and they make sure that the broker is patched and pen tested and updated, and they spend a lot of time thinking through threat scenarios on the broker that most people, if they don't have a huge AppSec organization, just don't have time to do. There's also a lot more detection and automation behind identifying trouble. So your cloud broker can send logs to their logging service and their alerting service. It can send things to their security dashboard. Many cloud providers have specific security tooling that you can run on your IoT devices that shows a dashboard of, hey, this device was sending 1 message an hour and now it's sending 300 an hour, or hey, this device over here has 75 failed login attempts in the last 6 seconds. So there's a lot of detection and automation in the cloud that helps users do better at security. It's also really a lot easier to do things like per device policies because you can piggyback off, like for example, in AWS, you can piggyback off IAM policies, you can piggyback off specific device IoT policies. The cloud makes it easier because they provide the infrastructure. But as we all know, the cloud is just another person's computer, so there are downsides to the cloud. The clouds are highly configurable, which is good, but there's a lot of pressure to bring in legacy customers, people who haven't done this, so the bar isn't always super high, which means that you are, in a sense, getting into a group of folks who may not have the same security posture that you do. For example, in many cloud service providers, part of their bootstrapping process is to default credential all the devices with the same certificate. That's great for ease of use, and you're supposed to go change it, but the reality is that not everyone does. So it can make it really easy to do bad things at scale. More and more devices are connecting. That means that the paradigm from factories, where everybody had a physical right to be there and a physical need to access those machines, now you're opening it to the internet, which may or may not share the same security model. Systems may not be designed with the appropriate redundancy. And what I mean by that is now you have this paradigm of, okay, if I don't have internet connection, my MQTT broker lives in a server somewhere in Nebraska, I'm in Texas. If the internet goes down, what do I do for a backup? I need something at the edge. And so customers have to spend a lot of time really thinking through their use cases and what makes sense to make sure that no matter what happens with the cloud connectivity, they can still do their jobs on the ground. So that was a lot of information in a very short amount of time. But the things I want you to take away is that MQTT is lightweight, widely adopted protocol for IoT message publish and subscribe. It can be insecure. It's often misconfigured, defaults with no auth, and it doesn't support native encryption. You can add encryption on top of it. You do need to make sure if you're connecting things to the cloud to encrypt over the wire and protect things like username and passwords and your certificates. If you're building devices, you need to make sure that there is a way to protect those things in memory, because the old paradigm, if I can touch it, I own it. Well, everyone can touch your IoT devices, so you have to make sure that it's at least more difficult to get that information. And have tight controlled per device certificates and per device ACLs is the most crucial thing you can do to ensure that you have a secure IoT deployment. Here is some resources. Masscan, that's my website at the top. It's super lame. I always say I'm going to go back and fix it, and I never do. And I've made my peace with the fact that it's just going to be super lame. So, but my slides are there if you want to go get them from this talk and a few others. MQTTPwn link is there. Also, if you want to get started building like the sensor that I did earlier, I think the Instructables is actually a super good tutorial. It's really well put together. You can follow me on Twitter at @securitychick. And I think that's it. I think that's everything. All right, track 2. I'm in track 2, yes.
Yes.
Do I know any other big protocols used for IoT? So Modbus is a big one in the industrial space. And my boss has my favorite quote of the year, and I really want to do a talk with this title. He told me, if anyone tries to connect Modbus to the internet, light them on fire. So I think that's a great con talk just in general. But yeah, there's a ton of other protocols. I wouldn't actually light people on fire. It's a metaphor. But Modbus is probably the one that I'm most familiar with. But there are others, and to be honest, I'm just getting into this space, so 85% of what I deal with is MQTT, and then you have the upcoming LoRaWAN protocols that are coming in that are going to be fairly ubiquitous. And there's a bunch of others I can't think of off the top of my head, but yeah, there's a ton of other protocols. This one just seems to be the most common, at least in my experience.
What are the common MQTT implementations in use? Open source versions commonly used. Can they be fingerprinted by version/implementation?
So Hive is really popular. PAJO is really popular. The one from Eclipse. Those are the top two, and then the big cloud brokers use their own. That's a pivot. It's loosely based on PAJO, but it's a pivot, so it's custom code. Can you fingerprint them? Yes. If you do a scan, I don't know if Nmap has it built in. I think you can fingerprint it. I haven't done it in a while, so I don't remember exactly how. I think the broker will return it in a banner. It will tell you the broker, if I recall correctly. I'll have to go back and look, honestly. I spend too much time on the blue side, man. I've forgotten all the things.
Yeah, so we do have confirmation that it does look like Nmap supports MQTT.
I felt like I remembered that, but like I said, I've spent way too much time. I spent all day yesterday doing one PowerPoint slide, and I feel like I've come so far from, where I thought my life was going, but here we are.
I think we've all been there at one point or another. It looks like somebody commented and asked, Mosquito is a popular MQTT broker for smart homes. Is there a popular one that's used in the industrial space that people could look for?
So there's actually a lot of Mosquito in industrial. That's probably the most common one I've seen. Hive is also, this is my experience. People who roll their own, who are like, I've totally got this and I don't need anybody to tell me how to live my life. They tend to do Mosquito. And then people who are mindful that they need help tend to go with something like Hive, just because it's more managed and it has a few more security features and updates. And I can link to that actually. And also, just a plug, Hive does a really great job explaining the MQTT protocol. They've got just a ton of really good information here. Link. Not affiliated with Hive, just so we're clear. I like their website.
Not an ad.
Anything else? You know more about cows? So here's the funny thing, it's not just steering cows. They put sensors under cows' tails to see if they're going into labor. Blew my mind.
Wow, that's crazy.
Right? Like, who does that? They put sensors in their stomachs to see their acid levels and to see if like they're eating okay. Like, we've got cows with more sensors than our cars. It's insane.
Smart cows.
Smart, but they're not. See? Cows themselves are not smart. They're just connected.
Yeah. So I think the question then becomes is like, if they go off to slaughter, do we have to worry about bits of sensors getting into the food chain?
I would guess not, but I mean, I suppose it could. Most of the ones I've seen are in like ranching applications, so less like meat cows, more like ranch cows. I would assume that they either digest, and we don't eat the stomach. I mean, and I don't think, well, we do eat the tail, but I don't think we eat the part under the tail where the sensor goes. I grew up in a city. I honestly don't know. As much as I know about cow, I basically have gone to petting zoos, so that's how much I know about cows.
Okay, well, I think that's probably more than I know about cows, and I grew up in middle of nowhere, Tennessee.
How popular is MQTT as an attack target? Interesting question. I have been able to find zero data on this despite months of trying. And so either I'm the only crazy person who thinks this represents a huge attack surface, or it's being attacked and not publicized because people realize it's a huge attack surface, or people aren't aware of it and so they're just not attacking it right now. I think this is my personal theory. IoT device security is such an enormous trash fire right now that it's just so easy to attack the device. It's almost not useful to attack the broker in most implementations. But just like, sorry, I'm going to be very Microsofty for a minute. As we shift the attacker, target, then they're going to move to higher value targets. And so as you saw with, well, now, the operating system is patched, people pivoted to applications. I think that as hopefully IoT device security improves, I think you're going to see that natural pivot to a connected broker. Because if I'm looking at it as an attacker and the first thing I saw was, okay, sure, I could take over your smart camera at home and, compromise it, whatever. Then I have access to one feed. And that's cool. I mean, that's cool. But I can take over a broker and have access to hundreds of millions of devices. And that's really, really cool. And most brokers are shared. So I think it represents a really interesting attack surface.
I think my question would be is, do you think that that it's not being attacked, or do you think that we don't have visibility so people say we're not being attacked because they don't know if they're being attacked?
Based on no data whatsoever, my gut says it's not being attacked right now. And the reason I say that is there have been, if you look across cloud service providers, there have been incidents where the broker fell over that wasn't malicious. It was just, service availability. They pushed a patch, they made a change, whatever, and the broker fell over, and hundreds of millions of customers were disconnected. And usually when I see that happen, you see this natural pivot in hacker circles that goes, interesting, they did this by, updating a patch. I wonder if I could do this by, sending a bad packet or whatever. So I haven't seen that. And maybe I'm just not in the cool kids clubs anymore. I don't know. But I haven't seen any chatter on this anywhere. So anything less cool than connected cows that you found that surprised you? There's been a lot of IoT security that has surprised me, but not in good ways. I think I'm overall surprised that multi-billion-dollar companies that manufacture devices really still haven't figured out even the basics of IoT security. It amazes me that I think it's made me more fearful as I walk around my house and look at my smart devices and go, huh, I know your security posture and it's not good. I think I'm surprised that we haven't seen more wide-scale devastation, quite honestly. You know, they do actually, I feel like I read somewhere that there was some cereal or something that had like a little IoT sensor in it, so you could tell when you were getting out of cereal and it would reorder it for you. It was, yeah. Oh, the other thing that surprised me, if you've heard of Fido, I think it's called Fido. It's an internet-connected dog collar, so if your dog goes missing, it can find it and report it back to you. That was a use case I'd never considered before. I don't know how internet connected I want my animals to be. Yeah, so Chris brings up an interesting point, and we've been actually having this very spirited debate at my day job. My strong hypothesis is, and I build security products for a living, so my entire job is to sell security products to people. And my strong hypothesis is that consumer electronics manufacturers have no incentive to buy these products because every single smart device in our homes has been compromised probably within the last 12 months. And it doesn't seem to affect their bottom line that much. People just sort of expect it, and that's sad, but it's not untrue. Wait, like multiple networked refrigerators? Because now I just want to know what the use case for all the refrigerators are. Have you checked on your other neighbors? Are they still alive?
When you're too lazy to go open the fridge, you just connect to the fridge to look inside to see that you still don't have anything that you didn't have before.
All right, all right. I would keep an eye on the basement one is all I'm saying. That's how all the horror stories start. Well, I suppose it depends, you know. No. Okay, see, and this is, now I have to tell the cannibal story. Now, see, this is where we're at. Once upon a time, I'm going to keep it really short, I worked for NATO, and there was a guy and a girl who were having a relationship, and the guy was married, and so they weren't allowed to because military, blah, blah, blah. So one day, he was joking with her, and she was like, this is the most perfect thing that could ever happen, meaning their relationship. And he's like, yeah, but what if I told you I killed people and ate them every year on my birthday? Wouldn't that ruin it? And she laughed and she thought that was really funny. And then somehow she went home over the weekend and decided it was true. So she called the federal police in Belgium and they raided his refrigerator and took all of his meat to see if it was human. That is a true story from my life.
That is amazing.
Yeah. I never have an opportunity to tell the cannibal story and talk, so this was exciting. That's usually more of an after con in the, you know, lobby bar kind of discussion.
Well, with 4 minutes to go before I think Kat goes, then I guess we will wrap up. And thank you very much for the presentation, the information on IoT security and on MQTT. And if anybody has any additional questions, Twitter, Discord, anything else you want to plug?
No. I'm pretty responsive on Twitter. I'll hang out. Where do I hang out in Discord? HallwayCon or LobbyCon? I'm very confused as to the difference.
I think most
Or
people are
here.
chilling in lobby.
Okay, cool. I'll hang out here for a little while and then I'll probably head over to LobbyCon.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.